My name's Blair Murphy. I'm the curator of exhibitions here, and I'm really happy to be here today with Joshua Challen Ice to talk with him about his Solos project. Like I mentioned before, Solos is our exhibition series that's devoted to solo exhibitions by artists who are based in the Mid-Atlantic, which we think we've been doing since 1988. We've been doing some archival research, sort of the date we've fallen on. We've really enjoyed having Joshua and Brandon's projects on view. Over the last month, the shows are both up until May 25th. So tell your friends to come and see them until then. Let me see. I'm going to do a quick introduction. Joshua Challen Ice creates sculpture, kinetic, and light-based installation art to explore ideas related to architecture and philosophy, which you'll hear more about. His work has been exhibited in solo exhibitions at Sculpture Center in Cleveland, Ohio, Carlow University Gallery in Pittsburgh, and Gradient Project Space in Thomas, West Virginia, and in group exhibitions at Miller ICA, at Carnegie Mellon University Space Gallery, and the Royal Danish Academy, among other venues. He has participated in artist residencies and fellowships in the United States and Europe, and created numerous immersive public art installations throughout Pittsburgh, where he lives and works. He graduated from Point Park University with a BFA in lighting design and entertainment technology. So thanks for being here, Josh.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Blair, for the introduction, and thanks, everyone, for being here to talk about the work. I'm excited to hear some of your takes and your thoughts on what you're seeing here. I do love a cold read, so before I explain everything, if you just keep those thoughts in your mind, don't let me corrupt your thoughts with everything I'm about to say, and any thoughts you have. Before I were to explain it, we can talk about afterwards, but just give you a little background about where I'm coming from. My background's in exhibition design, management, and fabrication. So I work with other artists in Pittsburgh, other institutions, to build and fabricate and install work in galleries around the Rust Belt area mainly. So a lot of my inspiration comes from the job sites that I've worked on, the other artists and projects that we've built together. Before that, I was involved in theatrical set design, lighting design, and things like that. So you'll also see kind of references to the way that theater design works in creating a moment in time, creating an immersive space that also has a bit of character in between the sets, the props, and the lighting. So involving those things in the gallery was what really interested me in working with galleries in the first place, and showing the kind of process that goes on in these different disciplines. So I'm interested in the idiosyncrasies that you see on these job sites, the differences between making for theater, making for galleries, and making for the built environment, the world that we live in. There is a history in my family of kind of handymen working on farms, building their own homes, cabins. And I'm interested in kind of exploring my relationship with that in the current day, and the way that I work with art through the same techniques and methods that my grandfather, say, worked with in the past. So I'm using the same techniques to create a theatrical version of what is more practical when the skills are used in that way. So I'm always interested in seeing the small moments that you find when you're walking around a job site, that you're trying to connect the dots between a choice that was made and the final product. This piece specifically is thinking about the efforts that are placed in work, where those efforts are placed, and for me personally, how they're often misplaced within a project, within a setting. And thinking about this one specifically, I have been working with these chair designs for a bit over a year now, and tinkering with the idea of creating these kind of modern, sleek-looking chairs out of construction lumber, and that being the kind of first misstep in the process. In creating, fine furniture, you would often use a more stable, hard material, a harder wood, rather than a pine that you would use to construct homes. And that kind of starts this snowball effect of one bad choice after another that creates the kind of calamity, the act of passion that you see here. So I'm often exploring the relationship between the furniture scale and the architecture scale, the tolerances that go between the two, how you can work a little bit more sloppily in one scale and you need a little bit more precision in the other, and then kind of transmuting their materiality between the two practices. So as you see here, there's this very deliberate act of the chair making being pulled from the materials in the space itself. And as you're working your way through the space, you kind of experience these frames as frames in time, of moments in time. So the chair starts on one side, it is in action in the middle, and then its resting place on the other side. But as you make your way around to the corner of the space, you kind of see the deliberate plans that that went into this moment of passion in order to throw the chair through the window. So you see my workings, my renderings, my drawings of how the physicality, the practicalities of getting this chair in this window came to be, and it's kind of revealed that it's much more of a considered contemplative act rather than the act of passion that it might seem to be at first glance. That probably leaves us at a good place to take some questions and see what Blair has to say as well.
I guess my first question, and I think it maybe struck me especially as we set up today, just bringing all of the chairs into the space. But when we first started talking about the project, was kind of struck by your selection of the chair as an object to sort of be the focal point of the installation. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that choice.
Yeah, I think whenever I first started thinking of designing sculptures that involved a chair, I was thinking of it as a stand-in for the body itself, the kind of body of the worker and the rest that chair represents in a way. But at the same time, as soon as you become a chair maker, the chair also represents the work that is involved to get to the point of rest and the kind of cyclical nature that goes into making in order to get to a moment of rest. And as I was building this exhibition, I was kind of reinforced these thoughts where building one chair is pretty quick and simple. I can make one of these chairs in about a day and a half. As soon as I need to make two of them, it takes me 2 weeks, because there's just like a bunch more like kind of roadblocks within me. There's more repetitive motions. It's less interesting going from one part of the process to the next. And then thinking about all of these chairs that are brought in here today and the mass-produced nature of them, and in that scale, they're much easier to produce at scale, right, because they are everything is handmade, but they are assisted by the process of making them quickly. But whenever you are using materials that you shouldn't be using, doing them in a shop that you shouldn't be making furniture in, it all kind of compounds to this different task on top of itself.
And you sort of mentioned this a little bit with the reference to the wood, but one of the sort of significance of the wood in the corner I thought was interesting, and that the relationship between the wood that the chair is made of being the same as the wood from the stud wall, and that sense of like the worker's exhaustion and almost sort of I don't know, cannibalization is sort of a grim word, but I think that was something that I thought was interesting about the installation, that idea of labor and like what we give of ourselves to make something, even something as simple as a chair. And I was curious about how you'd kind of brought that idea into the space physically.
Yeah, I think between the kind of the leftover elements over here, being connected to the wall itself and the process of making the kind of remnants of the sawdust in the different places, I wanted to connect the chair to the architecture, and one of the like more direct ways I did that were these stud stamps that are often used to identify the type of wood and the quality of wood. These studs have been sanded down the stud stamps were removed from them, and then I created a custom stamp to be able to match the studs to the chairs. So on each chair, there's a corresponding stamp as if it was, scooped right out of the larger stud, and you can see the replication of it in the same location as if it is the same chair over moments in time. So I think the sawdust is maybe the more evocative kind of form of that, where if I do uncuff my pants right now, you'll see like a waterfall of sawdust fall out of it. So it is kind of inevitable in every pocket, in every crease, in my car, everywhere you'd think. It kind of gets into your life. So it is the idea of like never being able to put down the work at hand, even if you are intentionally doing so.
Yeah, I very early in my career worked at a place that was also a theater, and they had a rule that you couldn't use glitter in performances, which I think in other spheres of performance, glitter is the equivalent of sawdust.
Yes. Yeah.
I had never thought about sawdust in that way, but yeah. You mentioned, too, your background in theater and stage design, and I also was curious about the element of sort of like magic or illusion in the installation, and if that was something you thought about or had worked with before.
Yeah, and most definitely in multiple ways. Theater is kind of like this, like semi-magic form of creating, because you have the trick of distance. Every work that I made while I was in school was judged from 30 feet away, because any audience member is no much closer than that, not much closer than that. So there's this trick of the eye that you can create via distance. There's ways to manipulate forced perspective, textures to create more realistic things on the stage, and then bringing that idea and way of working into the gallery. You do have to get a little bit more tricky with things, and the kind of spectacle involved with theater is often an interesting entry point for a viewer to kind of take in a more contemplative project, I think. So one, using humor, two, using spectacle in a way that kind of brings a viewer in has always been kind of an interesting jumping off point for me. But as well as like while thinking about kind of the magic within each of my works, remembering that like a lot of my childhood actually was, my dad was a hobby magician for a lot of his life and would do performances, and the idea of performing magic was never that interesting to me, but the mechanics behind it and the design of the tricks, as it were, was always very interesting to me. So the physical ability to kind of break down how this effect has been created, and the ability to talk about it, is a more interesting version of a magician keeping his secrets than that to me.
Right, and setting it up in a way that's actually very transparent, like the installation is just here and you can walk all the way around it.
Get the whole way up to it, as opposed to the theatrical experience, yeah.
Are there questions in the audience? Yeah, Josh.
I'm totally obsessed with this room, and I've been here already before, and I just think it's incredible, so congrats.
Thank you.
But just two observations, I think I normally don't love referring to other artists, especially older iconic artists, but you said the thing about you work in this field, fabricating for other artists and for the space where other artists' work goes. And I just think the thing about bad decisions around pine is so interesting, because Donald Judd also, from a technical perspective, made a lot of bad decisions with pine.
Sure.
So if you have thoughts on Judd and chairs and whatever. But just what's so captivating to me here is there's a spectrum of artists or of artists' feelings about exposing what they do or not, exposing how they mounted something to the wall or not, or made something. And here it's all your screws are apparent, which Judd would never. But so there's a lot, and you gave us your plans on the wall. There's a lot of exposing, but then there's also a lot of mystery through these really surrealist, this cement or clay coated tools. But also you have tools that are not coated, and then there's this book moment here, and I just. That doing both at the same time, being exposing so much and divulging so much, but also creating so much mystery, is just really special and kind of amazing about this work. So but that's a compliment more than anything.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I think that kind of to your point, the deliberate nature of showing the things, but it's also kind of tied into the aesthetic nature of working in these spaces and like wanting to be as real as possible with the situation, but then leaving these large swaths of blank space that you can kind of fill in. So hopefully the prop moments will give you like an eye into the world, and then you can take that elsewhere.
Thanks for talking about your work. It's really nice to see the show. I was just thinking a lot about labor and the ethics of labor and rest, and then how that has to do with this like kind of narrative that you're building that has to do with process and this like act, right, of throwing the chair. And I guess my question is like, what I was thinking about too when you were talking about your grandparents, you know, using the same tools but for this idea of like utility, and how this show kind of intersects with the idea of like what is the utility of art. Is that something you think about in the show or relates to that?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that took me into that zone was I did a program with architecture students, and it was 40 architecture students, and I was the only artist in this room. And for the week, we were talking about material conservation, climate change, ways to change the resources when building architecture to benefit the world moving forward. And the sustainability idea was very rooted around materiality, and I was kind of dumbfounded that no one was speaking about the people that we were making the work. And they were saying we need to deconstruct this cement parking garage into its components and build a new building out of it. And I'm thinking about the people that are, you know, like lifting things, moving things, like taking the body into account. So I think these kind of more difficult acts that I'm like portraying in the work is almost this this form of like self-flagellation, in that I have the skills to be able to do the kind of functional thing, but I'm choosing to do the aesthetic thing. And I think pointing back to that and pointing towards the people that do the functional items that kind of build our environment that we live in every day can hopefully be like the eye into taking that perspective out into the world as you're making your way through space, thinking about who mounted these pipes that are in here and why they go in the various forms that they go in. And the utility of like my art is kind of nebulous within there, because it's trying to create a narrative to discuss the working class and the people that are within that, but I'm also dancing on the outskirts of it in a strange way. So it's definitely something that's always tenuous in my work.
Hi, thanks for coming in and sharing your work. This is awesome. I know you've you mentioned a couple times that you're using materials and tools in unconventional ways to make these pieces. But do you ever stumble across a technique or anything that you think, oh, this could actually have a more utilitarian purpose that I can use in my work for other artists, or maybe share with other people who work in stage design? Do you ever have those moments where the artistic side informs the more utilitarian side of your work?
Yeah, most definitely. I think all of the projects that I work on with other artists, as well as my own, there's always this process of like solving problems in the least problematic way. But because we're having big asks, because we want to put a chair through the window, there's like compromises that need to be made in this world. And the way that I've been always super interested in working those things out is through like this brainstorming process. So the idea of having the library of projects that I've worked on and a community of people to share that with, it's such a niche thing. No one I'm going to encounter is ever going to need to do this exact thing. But we can like take elements of how this happened into different projects, and I think that feeds my own practice. Hopefully, it creates a better community of artists around me as well. And I mean, even farther than that, I do make furniture and functional items. So the techniques that you develop to do this will just make those processes simpler to wrap your head around on one, but also the techniques are all intertwined for sure. Thanks.
Okay, well, first off, thanks for talking about your parents or grandparents. Because that was my first thing when I walked in, I had one mechanically oriented grandfather and one wood-oriented grandfather. And as soon as I walked in, and also the smell, it was just, I was right back into my grandfather's shed, and thanks for that. But I guess I wanted to ask about the second grandfather. He put all of the shavings on the floor and was slowly building up the elevation, I think, of his garage. And that's what I guess you only briefly touched on it, but it's an important part of the exhibit here. And I'm particularly over there. It's back to the emergent property from before. It's almost like it's erupting out of there. Yeah. Is it just like it's just everywhere, or is there something more to the eruption from the box?
So the inspiration for the specific way this came together was the pile of scrap around my chop saw in my studio. So you have a chop, it kind of rains down around it in a very specific way, and then the scrap piece drops to that pile. And I probably didn't clean that pile up for 3 years. And it was like knee-high in the center and would taper out towards the sides. And it became this aesthetically interesting thing in the shop, and it was like engulfing the miter saw stand. Eventually did clean this up one day and was contemplating like how it does just get into everything in the studio. I'll pull a box open that hasn't been opened in years, and there will be sawdust in there. This toolbox specifically came out of my late grandfather's workshop, and has been in my like home garage for a long time, using it in that way. And the aesthetics of it worked really well with the kind of it wanted to be a small little workshop in the corner here with just the suggestion of the workshop. And so depositing the sawdust on here, I just filled up a cup one at a time and poured it on the top and let it fall down, let gravity do what it wanted to. Repeated that process inside of the bottom part, but yeah, I wanted it to look like it fell there from the sky almost, yeah.
One of the things I really loved about this is this shirt right here, and the fact that it looks like two shirts cut up and sewn back together with the two tones and the massive like pocket full of sawdust. I guess that was kind of my in to ask about your manipulation of ready-mades and how you were sort of thinking about which tools to modify, which ones to include unmodified, and are there any more interesting stories like the toolbox coming from a special place and all that sort of stuff that wouldn't be seen?
Yeah, so the jacket specifically is a replica of my grandfather's welding jacket. So if you remember those like mint green welding jackets, often for like educational purposes. He worked at a plant, and when we were cleaning out his garage, we found that he had just been stealing welding jackets, and he just like stacked up all of this pile of welding jackets. And I wore it for a while and I really loved the fit, and ended up wanting to replicate it in this way just for personal use. And once I did that, it kind of became my studio smock in a way, and started kind of gathering the dust, the paint of the processes that I'm going through in the shop, and being that kind of relic of projects past. So it's been a bit strange not having it while it's been in the exhibition here. But I mean, similarly, I found this How to Fix Damn Near Anything book in a thrift store and never even opened it. I just was like, we know what this is going to be used for. and it's sat on a bookshelf until I thought about the situation here. But like I'm almost thinking of the jacket and the use of the toolbox as like this echo of what they used to be, and the kind of shadow of the object itself.
I'm not from theater background. I'm a collagist, or rather, I stumbled upon collaging. So this almost strikes me as a collage, like a three-dimensional collage. And I'm really curious about two different things. One, you talked about solving problems in the least problematic way, but this glass is just like, that sounds like the most problematic way.
Yeah.
Like, why is that chair not hanging from like wire or
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So if you could talk about that, and then if you could talk about the collage on the wall
Yeah.
also.
So I think the effort that I put into putting this chair through the glass was 90% of this project. I came in and made the wall, distributed the items in about a day and a half, and then spent 3.5 days specifically cutting this hole for this last arm here. So every step of the way, when I was talking to friends or fabricators about this, they were asking me why I wasn't cutting the chair in half and gluing it on either side of the glass. And I didn't have a really good answer other than that I wanted to see it like this. But I think the concept feeding itself in that way, where I am putting way too much effort into this small detail of the work. And it also kind of created very high stakes as we were installing this is the single chair that I had cut in half very delicately, and if any part of the process went wrong, which it did multiple times, there was kind of concessions made during certain parts to get it to its final form. But I think that the relief after it happened, the kind of moment of it all going together was really what I was looking for. And other than that, the collage itself is kind of the way that I'm thinking of it as my thinking cloud, as my idea generation. So I'm seeing these drawings in my head, thinking about how these chairs could be manipulated to become sculptures, to become non-functional. So the single chair drawings that you see are all creating non-functional chair using the negative space that's created within the chair, depending on which way you manipulate it. It's very based in the idea of 3D modeling and drawing in the computer, and then bringing these kind of magical, nonsensical physics constructions into real life through effortful fabrication. So it's meant to tell the story of the many different ideas that came to the final idea of throwing the chair through the window, and the kind of moments that led there.
This is more of an observation than a question, but what really strikes me about the pieces is just how well crafted they are and how smooth. And I wasn't thinking when I saw them that they were made out of construction grade wood until you said that, and then that made it even more special for me, I guess, because when I look at them, I just noticed those curves, they seem so perfectly made, and how they're put together, and it's so even, and they do look more like mass-produced, not handmade objects. And I'm even looking at those pieces of wood over there, how the one has that curve, and some of the other ones are so smooth, they just I just want to feel them, So anyway, that was just my observation.
Oh yeah, thank you.
So I feel like I'm still thinking through what I want to say, but there are a couple moments that I want to point out that kind of resonate with me, and and a word that you just used, nonsensical, I think, which I find kind of interesting in thinking about some of the parts of the piece. And something that I have been thinking about, you've talked about these sort of piles of sawdust that are building up and how there's kind of the connection to the reality of the wood shop and their occurrence, but also this more surrealist kind of eruption of them in places where they would not be expected. And the little piles that are up between the Stutzad and the center window, that on one level is kind of one of those magical moments. But I did this piece years ago where I x-rayed walls of existing architecture, and I displayed the x-rays over the spot where they took place. And there were moments like that in the interior of the walls where, with the work being done over, decades, stuff sort of fell into places where it could gather. And so that being kind of this magical moment, but also a connection to reality at the same time. And so that's a place that I kind of keep going back to. And one maybe something that's a little bit more of a question. With the chair in the center, it's like the actual chair fitting through the plexiglass in a kind of a very one-to-one relationship. It's the thing embedded in the window. With the window to the left of that, from my vantage point, it looks like something where the chair could be turned and moved through the space, yet it couldn't really be put through that space. Yeah. And so I'm kind of curious about that decision.
Yeah, I think whenever I see this void at the end here, I'm always thinking about the whole left when the Roadrunner runs through a door. So you have this moment of like passion, but it's also like entwined with a humorous nod to a certain extent. The plexiglass was cut with a laser cutter, so I have the void of the exact shape of the inside. And there was a point that I ended up cutting it, but contemplated having it just like kind of as if it fell out and onto the ground. But I almost am seeing another version of this work where the chair is on a pendulum that swings through this void, where the chair physically could fit through that void. It is technically the exact right. If you angle it at the right angle, you could push it through. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't look. It's strange. Yeah. I've showed the profile of this curve to friends outside of the context of the work, and it's not exactly recognizable as a chair either. It's almost this. It is kind of like a shadow that's been reprojected and stretched in different ways. So yeah, like it's similar to the jacket or the tool bench. Thinking about like the negative space, the shadow of the object.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, two actually. First, what does sawdust taste like? And the second is, what's next for you?
Okay. Sawdust is often salty, as you'd expect maybe. But the scariest part is when you blow your nose and you find it in the tissue, actually. The next for me, I am working on a solo show for University of Pittsburgh's gallery, working through really early stages of that, be a site-specific work. I am currently building furniture and creating more of these chairs in the vein of some of these sculptures you see kind of drawn out on the wall here, and have some group shows planned for Pittsburgh coming up in the summer.
Great.
great place to wrap up. Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. And
Thanks,
thank you
Blair.
all for being here. Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.